Welcome to our deep dive, and today we're going to be looking at, well, a real estate deal. A real estate deal gone wrong in Baltimore. We have this stack of letters and official communications, and I'm excited to kind of sort through it
Uh,
with you and kind of piece together what exactly went wrong. Almost like a financial mystery, right?
yeah, and this is one of those cases where it's really interesting
Yeah.
because it shows you sort of how real estate and tax policy and even like consumer protection all kind of intersect in these really surprising ways. Plus,
Mhm.
you really get to see how even a simple transaction like buying a house can have some pretty wild unintended consequences, especially
Yeah.
when you throw in things like historic tax credits, which a
Yeah.
lot of folks probably don't know a ton about.
Right, right. Okay, so let's just set the scene here. Our homeowner, the guy who bought the house, his name is Nicholas Miles, and he purchased a house from a company called Eager Street Development 28 LLC. Sounds pretty standard so far, right?
Yeah, totally. Except there's a third player here. It's the Historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition. They're known as HEBCK, and they're a community organization really focused on kind of revitalizing the neighborhood. And they're the ones that make things a little more complicated here.
Gotcha, gotcha. And HEBC, they're involved because of these historic tax credits. I've heard of these, but to be honest, I don't really understand how they work.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
actually like a really powerful tool to encourage investment in historic buildings.
Hmm.
Developers can get tax credits for rehabbing these old buildings,
Yeah.
and that can make these projects a lot more viable financially. So it's kind of a win-win, right?
Hmm.
Developers get an incentive, and then these historic buildings get a new lease on life.
Okay, so Nicholas was able to get a reduced purchase price on his house because of these tax credits.
Exactly, but there was a catch.
Hmm.
As part of the deal, Nicholas was supposed to deliver those tax benefits. We call them the historic tax credit proceeds to HBC fee. Seems simple enough, but that agreement is what turned into a legal battle pretty
Yeah.
quickly.
Okay, so the historic tax credit proceeds are the actual money the developer gets back from the government. That's got to be a lot of money, right?
Oh yeah, it can be a pretty significant chunk of change, and that's really where the whole conflict comes in. HGBcast claims that they never got those proceeds from Nicholas. So in this letter from September 18th of 2018, HGBcast's attorney, her name's Danielle Stagger Zoller, she writes to Nicholas and informs him that he owes them, well, a lot of money, $36,394 to be exact.
Wow, that's not a small amount at all. Does she give any explanation for why they believe they're owed this money?
No, not really. Her letter.
Yeah.
It doesn't really give a specific explanation,
Yeah,
but
so-
she sets a pretty firm tone. Then things get even more serious. In another letter from Zoller on October 12th, this one is a notice of default, basically stating that Nicholas has breached the agreement.
Whoa, a notice of default? That sounds really serious. What does that even mean for Nicholas?
Basically, HEBCAC is claiming he didn't hold up his end of the bargain. In this letter, Zoller, she gives him a 15-day deadline to hand over the funds and makes it very clear that there will be consequences if he doesn't.
So this is where it starts to feel like a legal thriller almost. What kind of consequences are we talking about here?
Well, she references the Maryland debt collection laws, so it
Oh,
seems like
okay.
legal action is a real possibility. She also mentions a few key documents,
Yeah.
the historic tax credit agreement, a residential contract of sale, and then just like a general agreement. So it sounds like there's a lot of legal paperwork around this whole thing, which
Yeah.
maybe that explains why things are getting so messy.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like they're turning up the heat on Nicholas. What happens next in this real estate drama?
Okay, so things get even more intense when a new attorney arrives on the scene. This is George F. Ritchie, and he takes over all communication for HEBCAC. His first letter, it's dated November 7th, and it's pretty serious escalation.
Okay, so a new attorney. That definitely raises the stakes. What does Richie bring to the table?
Well, his letter demands mediation, and he really emphasizes that the historic tax credit agreement is actually directly incorporated into the residential contract of sale. So that means it wasn't just like a side deal. It was a legally binding part of the whole house purchase. He gives Nicholas 5 days to agree to mediation, with a deadline of November 27, 2018.
So the pressure is really on for Nicholas now. Did he agree to the mediation?
Well, Ritchie sends another letter on November 16th, and in it he states that they intend to sue Nicholas if he doesn't respond. We don't know for sure what Nicholas did next,
Uh-huh.
but 8 months later, a new figure enters the story. So this is Rebecca Zick. She's a mediator from the Maryland Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. and she reaches out to both Nicholas and HEBCAC in June of 2019.
Hold on. The Attorney General's office, this just took a major turn.
Yeah, this is a
Yeah.
pretty big deal. The Attorney General's office is responsible for protecting consumers from unfair or deceptive business practices. So for them to get involved means that this dispute has caught the attention of a state agency with a lot of power.
Okay, so what does the Attorney General's office have to say about all this?
So in Zick's letter, she outlines Nicholas's complaint, which is obviously about the demand for the historic tax credit proceeds. But she also brings up some potential construction issues with the house, like some basement flooding.
Wait, so now there are problems with the house itself. So it's not just about the missing funds, it's about the quality of the property too.
Right, exactly. This just adds a whole other layer of complexity to the situation. Zick explains the mediation process, and she mentions that if it fails, then they could go to arbitration. And she also highlights the Attorney General's enforcement options, which is sort of a reminder of the potential legal consequences for both parties.
Wow, things were getting really complicated. So how did HEBCA respond to the Attorney General getting involved?
They responded through Ritchie.
Yeah.
In a letter dated June 14th, 2019, it's such a really fascinating response that I think might surprise you.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. What do they say?
Ritchie acknowledges the repair issues that Nicholas has raised, and he expresses HEBCAC's commitment to working towards a resolution. He really emphasizes their desire for a fiscally responsible solution and an opportunity for dialogue, and sort of suggesting that they might be open to negotiation.
That's interesting. So they are acknowledging the problems with the house, but what about the missing historic tax credit proceeds? Did they address that at all?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? So he mentions that the HEBCAC estimates reviewing contractor estimates for repair work on Nicholas's house and other homes. But there's no mention of the missing funds at all. So it could be that they're trying to shift the focus away from
With the financial
dispute towards the construction issues to make themselves look more proactive and concerned about the homeowner's well-being.
That's a pretty shrewd tactic if that's what they're doing. But why the sudden change in tone? And will they be held accountable for those missing funds?
Those are the million-dollar questions. And to find out, we need to delve even deeper into this case.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm hooked. This is a lot more interesting than I thought a real estate deal could be.
Yeah.
We'll be back soon to unpack the next chapter of this whole saga. Okay, so we're back, and we're ready to dig a little deeper into this Baltimore real estate story. Last time, we saw how this house purchase turned into a big legal battle with missing historic tax credit proceeds, a notice of default, and even the Attorney General getting involved.
You know, what really stands out to me is how there's this imbalance of power at play here. You've got Nicholas, just a regular homeowner, dealing with all these legal and financial issues. And then on the other side, there's HEBCAC, this big community organization with lawyers who seem to be trying to control the situation and avoid taking responsibility.
It's like a classic David and Goliath story, isn't it? And it feels like those historic tax credits, while they're supposed to be a good thing, they've actually given HEBCAC even more power in this situation.
Right. It's a good example of how even when government programs have good intentions, they can sometimes have these unexpected consequences, especially for people who don't have the resources or knowledge to navigate them.
And now we've got the Attorney General's office trying to mediate this whole thing. Remember, Rebecca Zick, the mediator, she laid out a few options like mediation, arbitration, and even enforcement action by the Attorney General. That's a pretty big deal, right? It means this isn't just a small disagreement.
Oh, absolutely. The Attorney General has the authority to investigate and potentially take legal action against businesses that aren't being fair or are being deceptive.
Yeah.
So their involvement definitely makes this a lot more serious for both Nicholas and HEBCAC.
And Zick mentioned that Nicholas isn't the only one who's complained about these kinds of deals. Makes you wonder if there's something bigger going on here. Like maybe there's a pattern of problems with how HEBCAC is handling these transactions.
Yeah, that's definitely something worth looking into. If there are other homeowners having similar issues, it could mean there's a problem within HEBCAC itself or with the way these historic tax credit agreements are being used.
So with all this going on, how did HEBCAC respond when the Attorney General got involved?
Well, they sent a response to Zick through their attorney, George Ritchie, on June 14, 2019. And it's a really interesting letter because you can see they're shifting their strategy.
Okay, things are getting really interesting now. What did they say?
Well, Ritchie acknowledges that there are problems with the house that Nicholas has pointed out, and he says that HEBCAC wants to find a solution. They keep saying they want a fiscally responsible solution and a chance for dialogue, which makes it sound like they might be willing to negotiate.
So they're admitting there are issues with the house, but what about that missing money, those historic tax credit proceeds? Did they say anything about that?
That's the big question. They
Yeah.
talk about fixing the house, but they don't mention the missing funds at all. It could be that they're trying to change the subject, move the focus away from the money and onto the repairs.
Why would they do that? It seems like they're just trying to ignore the money issue completely.
It could be a way to avoid blame.
Yeah.
By focusing on the repairs, they're trying to make themselves look good, like they're being proactive and care about the homeowner.
Clever, but it still leaves Nicholas in a tough spot. He's got a house that needs work, and he's still out all that money from the tax credits. Plus, he said there's a lien on his property because of this whole mess.
Right, and that lien is a serious problem for Nicholas. It could affect his ability to sell the house or get a new mortgage. It's a financial burden that could stick around even if they fix the house.
So what does all this mean for HEBCAC? Are they going to get away with this?
Not necessarily. Even though they're trying to control the story by focusing on the repairs, the Attorney General's still investigating. And if they don't do something about that missing money, it could really hurt their reputation in the community.
That's true. They're a community organization, so what people think of them is probably really important.
Exactly. If people start thinking they can't be trusted with money, it could be harder for them to get funding for future projects.
Yeah.
This whole situation has put them in a risky position.
It's crazy how this real estate deal that seems so simple has turned into something so much bigger, with legal problems, financial risks, and even damage to their reputation.
It's a reminder that even programs like historic tax credits, which are designed to help, can end up causing problems. And it shows how important it is to be really clear about agreements, get expert advice when you need it, and be aware of the risks.
So, where do we go from here? Will Nicholas ever get that money he's owed? And will HEBSAC fix the problems with his house and the other homes?
We're going to find out in the final part of our deep dive, and trust me, the answers might surprise you.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our look into this Baltimore real estate situation. We've seen how a simple home purchase turned into this whole legal battle with missing money, construction problems, and the attorney general stepping in.
What's been really eye-opening for me is this whole power dynamic. You have Nicholas, just a regular homeowner, trying to deal with this complicated legal and financial mess. And then you have ABCAC, this big community organization with lawyers who seem to be using their power to control the situation and avoid responsibility.
It's a classic David and Goliath situation, right? And those historic tax credits, while they're meant to be a good thing, it feels like they've actually given HEBCAC even more power over Nicholas.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even when government programs have good intentions, sometimes they can have these unintended negative consequences, especially for people who don't have the resources to navigate them.
We saw that in Nicholas's case. He was promised a lower price on the house ahead of those tax credits, but when the money went missing, he ended up facing legal action and a lien on his property. It makes you wonder, who's responsible for making sure these tax credit agreements are fair and transparent?
That's a question that we're still left with as we wrap up this deep dive. HEBCAC has shifted the focus to those construction problems, but the missing funds are still unaccounted for.
And this issue goes beyond just Nicholas and HEBCAC. If there's a lack of trust between community organizations and the people they're supposed to be helping, it can really hurt their efforts to improve the neighborhood. After all, community development relies on everyone working together.
Absolutely. If people feel like they're being taken advantage of, or if they lose faith in the organizations trying to make things better, it creates this distrust that can undermine the whole idea of progress in the community.
So, what can our listeners take away from all of this? What are the lessons we can learn from this whole tangled situation?
I think it's a powerful reminder that even seemingly simple deals can have hidden complexities. It's important to understand any legal agreement you're signing, get professional advice if you need it, and be aware of potential risks.
It also shows how important those consumer protection agencies are, like the Attorney General's office. They're there to protect people who might be at a disadvantage when dealing with big organizations.
This case leaves us with a lot of questions and a sense that there might not be a neat and tidy resolution, but it also makes us think about the balance between what a community is trying to achieve and the rights of the people who live there.
It's a conversation we need to have, a conversation about finding solutions that benefit both individuals and the community as a whole.
You said it perfectly. Let this deep dive be a reminder to be cautious with complex deals, stand up for your rights, and remember how much power informed citizens have. And when it comes to real estate, always pay attention to the details. They can make all the difference.
That's some great advice. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a fascinating, if a bit unsettling, journey through the world of real estate, tax credits, and community development.
It's been my pleasure. And for our listeners, remember to stay informed, stay vigilant, and always ask questions.